Okay, so obviously there's a whole bunch of people here today. If you have a moment, if you could put your name in the chat box with your contact information if you like. And then Christine is updating our contact information for your email and address and whatever, your organization that you're with. If you don't mind taking a minute to fill that form out, that would be super helpful also. I think that's it. Does anybody have any other announcements that they want to share with the group before we get started? No? Okay. With that, I will turn it over. I want to thank Maria Reyes from the Seacoast Public Health Network. She connected me to Gail, Gail Coppins Gettens, if I said that correctly. I certainly hope so. She's our speaker today, and I'm going to give her permission to share her screen as well. She has a great presentation for us, and we're looking forward to seeing it. So thank you for being a part of our meeting today. Gail, with that, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you all so much. And if I'm going to share my screen, we can get this started here. Okay. So I'm a child development specialist by training. So I spent most of my career working with young children and supporting their families and supporting their children's development. And about 5 years ago, kind of made a lateral move into public health and semi-retired into new career in childhood lead poisoning. So I am technically with New Hampshire's Healthy Homes and Lead Poisoning Prevention Program. And just to give you backdrop, that is a program within New Hampshire's Division of Public Health Services. And we're one of 28 such programs in the United States where funding comes in for high-risk areas. And if you weren't aware, by the end of this presentation, sadly, you're going to understand how significant an issue childhood lead poisoning is in New Hampshire. We are one of the very high-risk areas. And the funding for the program I'm in almost exclusively comes from the Center for Disease Control. We have some parts of our program that have funding that come from in the EPA, and a tiny bit comes from general funds, meaning your tax dollars. But the program that I'm in was just all in and around children's lead poisoning, the testing, the keeping a track of that data. It all comes from the Center for Disease Control. So I start with this slide because it's usually pretty impactful, and most tell me they had no idea. But between 2014 and 2018, and it's only because the 2019 data hasn't come out quite yet, but will, and sadly the numbers are the same in terms of the volume. We have, in the last 5 years, we had 3,234 children in New Hampshire, guys, our tiny little state. 3,234 children poisoned by lead. Pretty shocking. And that averages out to about 640 children a year. Year after year after year. 640 children in 2014, 240 2015, 640 in 2016. You get the picture. And what those acronyms and numbers mean, EBLL stands for elevated blood lead level. So if you hear me spinning that off, that's what that means. More or less, a child's blood lead level has been tested and it's elevated. There's lead in the child's blood. And 5, and all those numbers after means micrograms per deciliter, which is 5 is the test result that when a parent gets a 5 or greater, that means the child's been exposed to lead, they've been poisoned and are in need of case management. 5 is the Center for Disease Control and the American Academy of Pediatrics reference level that a child's been exposed to lead. So a lot of gobbledygook to get us started. What you need to take away from that slide is we have this tragically large number of children poisoned by lead every year in New Hampshire. If you think of that, we have 640 children or more going into our school systems year after year after year after year. I think almost all of them destined to be in your special ed programs. So whether your interest is tax dollars or supporting young children, pay attention to this number because the economic cost is huge. All the while in this time frame of 2014 to 2018, fewer than 26% of our kids under the age of 6 were even tested. So if I was in the room, you'd see me spreading my arms saying, you know, we've had this huge number identified, but we had this tiny number tested. What does that all mean? It means that there's really a large additional number of children that are being exposed to lead being poisoned in New Hampshire that we haven't even found because they haven't been tested. So Flint, Michigan, you're all on mute, so you're probably not gonna be able to answer my question, but I use this as a reference point. When you say Flint, most people understand children were exposed to lead. 18 months drinking the water, when they switched from fresh, beautiful water in Lake Huron, started using the Flint River, higher pH, corrosive water, going through old lead service lines, at the same time stopped treating their water, complete human incompetence, not putting in the appropriate treatments. Long story short, everyone in the city of Flint was drinking contaminated water with lead and numerous other things in it for 18 months. So these are the numbers in New Hampshire, right? 640 children every year. Flint, Michigan, anyone want to guess how many children were poisoned under the age of 6? And we've tested every child in Flint, every child in Michigan for that matter, all gets reported into the Center for Disease Control, as does our data. So no one can shout out because you're on mute, so I'll shout out for you. And every possible number comes up, but it's going to surprise you. So again, our number is 640 children every year, year after year after year. In Flint, Michigan, 580 children were poisoned. Now don't get me wrong, this is human incompetence and one whole generation and one whole community impacted. So I'm in no way, Flint was a tragedy, and I can't say that enough. But my point is with this little exercise is, when I said Flint, Michigan, everyone on my screen probably somewhere in their brain said, oh yeah, water poisoning, lead in the water. You know, everyone knows when you say Flint, they say lead poisoning. That was 18 months, one-time event, we hope and pray. New Hampshire has more children poisoned by lead than in Flint, Michigan, year after year after year after year after year. And when you say New Hampshire, nobody says lead poisoning. I'd say good skiing, lakes region, beautiful coast, low COVID numbers, at least to date. They'll say a lot of things, but no one says lead poisoning. And the point of my presentation today is you will now say, we have a lead issue in New Hampshire for our children. So what am I going to talk about today? Super fast, because this is about a 90-minute presentation. I have 45 minutes. I'm going to give you a little bit of history. I'm going to tell you about the impact on a child's brain. I'm going to talk to you about the long-term consequences, because once the children are exposed to lead, their brain is damaged and it's a permanent brain injury, and it lasts a lifetime. So the impact on our criminal justice system, on our school system, on our community services, on medical services, has a real economic cost to our communities and our taxpayers. I'm going to talk to you about the fact that our testing rates in New Hampshire have been very low. They're getting slightly better, and we've had legislation to support that. And I'll talk to you about some of the federal laws on the national level to address that do some, but we need to go a lot more in protecting our children. So before we jump in, I'm going to show you a trailer to this documentary. This documentary is about to be released, but you can watch what they call a fine cut, final version on YouTube right now for free, which was really exciting for those of us in the lead world because we've been waiting and waiting for this to come out. So write this down. The documentary is Misled, America's Secret Epidemic. And I encourage you to watch it for free and encourage all in your collective agencies. So the story behind this is that's Tamara Rubin, that mom on the screen, and those are her 4 boys. All of them were exposed to lead, and especially that little baby was 9 months. His name's Avi. And they hired someone to do renovations on their house. They lived in Oregon. And they talked about having saved to buy their first house, a fixer-upper, saved 8 more months to finally hire someone to do the work on the exterior of their house. Tamara said, I didn't know anything about lead paint and lead poisoning. She said they finally hired someone, and that person said, don't worry, Mrs. Rubin, we're going to use lead-safe work practices. So she said, I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded good. Thought I hired a good contractor. And I said, don't worry, Mrs. Rubin, you and the kids can stay because we're working on the exterior. She said, okay, great. I got 4 kids under 10. That's a lot easier to hang around the house while you're doing the work. So they did the work on the house. Not only did they dry scrape, which is against the law, disturbing all the paint, not containing it, not spraying it with water first, dry scrape, so all the dust goes everywhere in and around the children and their toys. But worst, they used a blowtorch, also against the law, to heat up the old paint to scrape it off. When you heat up lead paint with a blowtorch, the lead is released in vapors, and our children inhaled it and were immediately poisoned. So much so when they got Avi's blood test results, they had to leave the house. They could not stay in the house. It had become a toxic site. So this is the documentary she created as she went on to figure out childhood lead poisoning because no one seemed to know anything about it. And then to uncover what an issue it is in the United States, also few people knowing about it. So I'm going to do my best to, I have to share screens again to bring this up for you. So bear with me. It's worth whatever weight it takes. And it starts with no introduction. So it just starts talking. So here we go.
We can't see it. There are no direct obvious symptoms. Her stomach was loud and she would be Jenna needs to be checked in hospital.
Is there a way to turn the volume up?
I've tried on both fronts.
Just never be the same, and there's nothing
much better.
Children just positive. So we're doing free blood light testing. We have a health clinic at the South Health Clinic has donated their time.
Whenever citizens get together to organize politically to deal with these issues, they just about every time.
I found a massive violation and I wanted to report it.
So that is America's secret epidemic, childhood lead poisoning. Let's see if I can get us back to where we need to be. So it's a powerful documentary with a very personal story, and I would highly recommend it if you have the opportunity to watch it at length. So just to level set, what is lead, so we all are on the same page? It's a naturally occurring element, and we take it out of the take you back to high school chemistry. It's on the periodic table, and it's very close to calcium in its molecular structure. I'm no chemist, but the toxicologists I work with tell me it's off by like an ion or two. So keep that in mind. Very similar in structure to calcium. That's how we get in trouble with the human body. What's its source? As I said, we take it out of the earth. And boy, once we take it out of the earth, we own this stuff. It is nasty. It has a half-life. What does that mean? It never becomes less toxic. It doesn't fade, corrode, or otherwise become less potent. So what does that mean? The white lead paint, if you think of the white gooey part with lead in it that's been on all of our buildings, our historic homes, our schools, our child care centers, for the past 100+ years, is that old white gooey stuff dries up, flakes off, or is disturbed during renovations and scraped. When that lead is released, it is as toxic today in 2020. It's as toxic today as when we took it out of the earth 25, 50, or 100 years ago. That's the problem. How did we use it? We learned in Flint, we used it in pipes. We've got plenty of old lead service lines in New Hampshire as well. However, our communities do an excellent job at monitoring the water sources, putting in the appropriate anti-corrosive treatments in our pipes. Not that it wouldn't be a great thing to get through our lead service lines and our old faucets that have, do you know lead was allowed in faucets? You know, the one in your bathroom you turn on every morning? Lead was in faucets up until 2014. That's 6 years ago. We used it in gasoline for almost 100 years. I think some of you of my generation used to drive up and there was just leaded, right? Now then you drove up and there was leaded and unleaded. You know, you had a choice, poison, non-poison, whatever you want to put in your tank. And now we have three choices of, you know, non-toxic, three choices of unleaded. We chose, you probably don't know this, we chose to put lead in gasoline. It was an additive. Lead is not naturally in gasoline. And I usually ask, does anyone know why? Sometimes there's a wise person that knows. It was, pistons were knocking. They were steamy, engines were knocking. Some of you of my generation may remember in Mobil's no-knock commercials. We put lead in gasoline as an additive. Can everyone mute, please? And so as a result, lead went in the gasoline and out the exhaust, contaminating the soil around most major highways and at intersections for almost 100 years. And we used it in paint up until 1978. And depending upon the age of all of you, 1978 probably seems like, I don't know, the time of the Waltons, like so long ago, you weren't even born. But the point is, as I just mentioned, is the lead is still in the paint, even if it's under layers of new lead-free latex. And as that paint corrodes, as it's disturbed during renovations, that lead is released, and it's just as toxic today as it was when it was first layered on 25, 50 years ago. So if you don't know the story, I don't have the time in this presentation, but this is another YouTube video that you really need to go out and watch. It's called Dutch Boy Paint, Failed Toy. You will be horrified. Dutch Boy Paint, Failed Toy. Dutch Boy Paint, Failed Toy. So see the little guy on the screen? So in about 1914, 1920, children were dying from lead poisoning. We had our first death, not harmed for life, but death of a child in 1914 in Baltimore, Maryland, in the US. Children were dying because the paint was so toxic. If you look at this video, the paint was actually 91% lead. Can you imagine? It was lead and a little bit of linseed oil. That was paint. And so in about 1929, the lead paint companies, which was actually the National Lead Company, was realizing their business was about to be wiped out. So what do? It's just like tobacco. They first rebranded themselves to Dutch Boy Paint. Same company, new name. And used this cute little child. So, their product is for children. It's safe, right? See, he has a little paintbrush and bucket. And they put out these little books. It says, see this paint book for boys and girls. They marketed directly to children, distributing these books with coupons and little cans of paint that was 91% lead throughout our elementary schools in the United States. It was literally a propaganda campaign and marketing campaign that their product was in fact safe for young children. Between that and a whole lot of paying off of our politicians, all of this is well documented, paying off our politicians, we kept lead in paint in the United States up till 1978, almost 100 years longer than any other Western country. In Europe, Britain, Yugoslavia, Spain, they all had it banned from their paint by about 1930, but not us. And that's why we're still talking about this issue in the United States, why we still have children entering our school system every single year in Raymond and every other community in New Hampshire who've been exposed to lead that will have consequences for a lifetime. So let's just talk about lead so you have an appreciation of what it is as a poison. Often when I'm in a room and I train pediatricians a lot, and I'll say, if all of us came together with all your clinical knowledge, medical knowledge, my knowledge of child development, and we were given the evil task, come up with the most perfect poison for young children, I say we most likely would come up with lead. And here's why. First of all, I hope you don't know this, but lead tastes good. It's sweet. They actually used it as a sweetener in wine for years, in champagne for up until I think in the 60s. And it's sweet. So when children get it on their hands and their toys and their pacifiers and they put it in their mouth, it tastes good. There's no deterrent to stop putting this stuff in their mouth. Second, you only take trace amounts. I think if you saw in the documentary clip, there was the pediatrician that had some little dust on his finger. It only takes trace amounts. There's kind of the urban myth that children need to eat paint chips, you know, the size of a Dorito, and binge eat them to get poisoned. Well, that's a myth. If a child ate a paint chip the size of a Dorito, it would most likely be a fatal incident of acute toxicity. It's just the amount of trace amounts of dust that you probably won't even see on their toys, hands, pacifiers, on the floors and surfaces of your house. And they have no blood-brain barrier. If you picture, you know, a brain and then think of like a piece of mesh over it, that's the blood-brain barrier. We all have one, thank goodness, and it does an amazing job keeping toxins out of our brain. But that doesn't fully develop. See this little guy on the screen? He doesn't have one yet. It doesn't fully develop until you're about age 6 years of age. So as a result, they're sitting ducks. The blood-brain barrier keeps out lead, mercury, toxins, other harmful substances that may harm your brain. But children under 6 do not have it. So when this little guy crawls on the floor in his apartment or his house and gets dust on his hands and picks up a toy that's been on the floor and puts it in his mouth that has lead dust on it, that goes into his mouth, into his blood, circulates through his body, and goes directly through his brain, wreaking havoc. In addition, children of this age, as I just mentioned, put everything in their mouth. They're crawling and sitting on the floors where this dust collects. They're pulling to standing on shelves and surfaces where dust collects. Lead's a heavy metal, so it settles. But most importantly to understand is that lead is stealth. It's under the radar. This is why testing is so important. So this little guy that's smiling at you, children who are being poisoned by lead, exposed to lead at this age that are going to have long-term consequences, they're going to smile at you. They're going to look healthy. They're going to act healthy, unless it's at such an extreme level that we're rushing them somewhere to be chelated. But the average child in your community that's being poisoned by lead is most likely going to spend lifetime in special education in Raymond. It's going to smile at you. There are no immediate symptoms. There are no long-term, the deficits that they have long-term do not present immediately. I always compare it to like if a child got into, God forbid, something in your medicine cabinet, something under your sink, God forbid. You know, you might not know what poisoned them, but they may be vomiting, they may be lethargic, they may be unconscious, they may be having a seizure. You know, you're getting red flags. Okay, I don't know what's wrong with this child. I don't know what's causing this, but something's really wrong with this child, and you get medical care. The kids being poisoned by lead, they have no red flags. You will have no idea unless you're tested. There are no red flags. It's stealth. You don't see the impact until they go to school when they can't read. You don't see the impact until there's severe behavior issues, until they have attention deficit disorder, until there's a speech and language problem, until there's hearing loss determined. You don't see the problems until later. And all of the exposure happens by their brains rapidly developing. Children's brains develop more synapses, if you will, the hardware in their brain between birth and 2 years of age than at any other time in their life. Birth to 2. You can see on this chart. And lead poisoning in the United States peaks largely because of their developmental behaviors between 18 months and 2 years of age. So exactly when we want to do everything in our power to protect their brains, enrich their brain, provide every great opportunity to support that brain development is exactly because of their naturally occurring behaviors, crawling, putting everything in their mouth, sitting and playing on the floor, that they're going to come in contact with lead and we won't even know it, damaging that brain development for a lifetime. So just so you understand, I mentioned already that the Center for Disease, the American Academy of Pediatrics number test result is 5. If a child has a test level of 5 or greater, it means they've been exposed to lead, they've been poisoned, and are in need of case management. And in 2012, when this was established, the CDC really importantly as well said, there is no safe level of lead. There should be no lead in a child's body whatsoever. It has no use, no purpose. When they're born, there is no lead in a child's body. So just so you have an appreciation of what we do in New Hampshire, because this may have to do with some of the families you work with. In New Hampshire, if a child has a blood test result of 3, so that's below the threshold, to 7.4, we send out a letter with some information to the parent and also the landlord if the child, we believe, lives in a rental unit. This is just kind of an FYI, because our action level is 7.5. So at 7.5, the legislature in New Hampshire, the rules that govern what our program can do, set by the legislature, says we can put boots on the ground. And our public health nurses go out and visit the child in the home or the apartment, do a lot of parent education, often the go-between between the parent and the pediatrician or medical home, getting the child additional blood tests, developmental screening, and as a resource really for both the family and the pediatrician. In addition to that, our lead inspectors go out and inspect the home. We're trying to find where the lead is. How did this child get poisoned? They use an electronic device called an XRF that can test the paint, and we also test the water. But I want to stress to you again, mostly because of Flint, we have tested the water in every single child who's had an elevation 7.5 or greater in New Hampshire, and we've never found lead in the water at any level of concern. Guys, it's not the water in New Hampshire. When I talk to people, they say, Gail, should I have my water tested? And I say, yes, that would be great. But if your house is built before 1978, where you really need to spend your money is to test your paint. If we find lead in the rental unit, then the rental unit goes what's called under order. It's an illegal administrative process with the state of New Hampshire, and the landlord has to address those hazards. They have 90 days to begin to address those hazards. Senate Bill 247, which was signed by Governor Sununu, which is the lead poisoning prevention in paint and water, that was signed in February of 2018. A little over 2 years ago, that lowered the reference level first to 7.5, and it will lower it again this coming July to 5. This is a great thing, and that our public health action level in New Hampshire, more or less, when our nurses go out, when our inspectors go out, will now be the same as the reference level the CDC and AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, have. So I wanted you to have an appreciation of what our services are. These are all free of charge that are provided to the families in New Hampshire when they have a blood test of 7.5 or greater. So this I just point up, if we were in a room, I would have given you a muffin cup with a little bit of sugar in it. And at this point I would have told you, stick your finger in the sugar and hold it up. And this is just to, again, debunk that myth that it's just a little bit, you can see on the screen, little bit of grains of lead dust, paint dust contaminated with lead on your floor, on your desk, on your kids' toys and hands that will poison them. The amount you usually won't even see. So what happens when this lead gets in your body? So first of all, it's not even supposed to be there. So lead gets into a child's body, and literally the human body, this little 2-year-old's body, is going, what is this stuff and why is it here? And eventually the body says, oh, this is really similar to calcium. Remember I mentioned it's off by an ion or two? So the body says, oh, this must be lead, and it treats it like lead, unfortunately. Excuse me, treats it like calcium. So what does your body do with calcium? We store it in the cells of our brain. We need it for brain function, and eventually it all gets stored in our bones. Now you always hear mother say, drink your milk, you need strong bones, right? Strong teeth, strong bones. It goes there ultimately. So on your screen, taking you back to high school biology, right? This is human thinking, human brain function. That's 2 synapses, the sending and the receiving. A message comes along, right? You learn this in biology. Neurotransmitter comes out, that purple light, the message jumps across and continues on, right? If you think of this as an engine, this engine runs on calcium. You have calcium all around your brain, all floating all around your synapses. So if a child's body thinks the lead is calcium, it puts the lead right here in the brain. And they have no blood-brain barrier to keep it out. Your brain does, but they don't. So in goes the lead, and it's circulating all through. When a message comes along, calcium goes in to make the neurotransmitter come out. When the message gets across, calcium goes in to make a message go back to the first synapse that says, yep, got your message, and they stay healthy and close. Calcium makes this run. So when lead's in a child's brain, it goes into these synapses every time calcium goes in, and at best gums it up. At best, it doesn't function well. Messages don't send when they're supposed to. They send at the wrong time, or they don't get sent. This is where we get all the impulsivity and the lack of emotional regulation and the inability to control behaviors and emotions in children. And worst case, when lead goes in and the synapses don't communicate, they retract and they die off. Lead kills the synapses in children's brains. So I'm going to show you a brain scan and talk to you a little bit about the Cincinnati lead study, longest running longitudinal study in the world. I keep ducking because I'm watching my clock. So this is a brain scan of a young child, male child, age 8, with an elevation of 13.4, which in the scheme of things, I mean, is well above 5, but isn't like a 20 or a 45. And this is from Dr. Kim Cecil. She's the lead imaging researcher at the Cincinnati Lead Study at Cincinnati Medical Center. Longest running longitudinal study in the world following children and children poisoned in utero through adulthood. So when I show this to pediatricians, and all the yellow, red, orange are all the areas in a child's brain that have been damaged. There's less gray matter density. All of this scan should be gray. All the areas that are red, yellow, and orange, there's less density, meaning there's less brain. Hollow, damaged, not functioning. When I show this to pediatricians, they are shocked, truly shocked. And the piece I hear the most about was they had no idea it was so pervasive, meaning that it's all over the brain, that it's not just, you know, one area or another that we might be able to compensate or work really hard to overcompensate in other areas of the brain. I just want to point out up top is the, your frontal lobe, executive function, pro-social behavior, speech and language, be able to control your emotions, regulate your behaviors, strategic planning. It's what separates us from the animal kingdom. And the back, this part right here is the back of your brain. That's visual, spatial interpretations. That's being able to interpret symbols, learning to read, to do math. That's why those children have such difficulty with that. And it handles cross-brain communication. So these children are really clumsy. They can't coordinate both sides of their brain, can't ride a tricycle, can't cross their midline to play athletics. Now that we have MRIs, we can really see what's happening to these kids' brains. So I'm going to show you another short video. It's from the Cincinnati Lead Study, and it is it has Dr. Kim Cecil talking on this topic, and it gives a much better overview.
The following children exposed to lead into adulthood. It's the longest running study of its kind in the world.
Nervous? A little bit.
Dr. Kim Cecil is an investigator for the Cincinnati Lead Study.
So lead tricks the body into thinking it's calcium. Whenever lead has got into your body, primarily through ingestion, it goes and hides where calcium should be, in the bones and in the cells of the brain. Visualize a neuron. There's the neuron that's sending the signal, and then another that's receiving the signal. And typically calcium is in that gap.
Calcium is essential for neurons to communicate. But when a child is exposed to lead, lead gets in that gap and blocks the flow of calcium. Without calcium, synapses get weaker and brain function suffers.
The average IQ of the Cincinnati Lead Study is 86. It should be 100 in a typically developing population.
Lead can disrupt brain growth and even lead to shrinkage or volume loss in brain tissue.
I can give you kind of the hint of volume loss. You can see these ventricles look plump because there's less brain. From this analysis, I can tell you that most of that volume loss is in the frontal lobe, and that region of the brain is responsible for what makes us the most human. It controls our decision-making, our ability to pay attention, our ability to plan, to make judgment, to evaluate rewards, all the things that we need in life to be successful.
Lead can cause harm wherever it ends up in the body. And lead poisoning can even be passed to the next generation.
If you're a pregnant woman exposed to lead when you were a child, that lead is stored in your bones, and when your body needs calcium for the developing fetus, it's pulling lead out of the bone instead of calcium in many cases.
So that's the Cincinnati Lead Study.
Cincinnati Children's Hospital and the
Don't need
University
that.
of Cincinnati have been following children exposed to lead into adulthood. It's the longest running study of its kind.
Nervous?
Hey, look, you got to
Dr. Kim
repeat
Cecil is an
without me even
investigator for the
trying.
Cincinnati Lead Study.
So lead tricks the body into thinking it's calcium. Whenever lead
Sorry about that. The joy of Zoom. So just as I run out of time here, just to capture for you the impact, now that you have an understanding of lead and how children are poisoned. So you now understand that lead causes these bad outcomes. It's not a risk factor for or has potential to. All the research shows it's causal. You come in contact with lead, bad things are going to happen to a child's brain. It's really that simple. And a little bit of exposure in early childhood, we now know, has significant long-term consequences, especially in the areas of behavior. Few people understand that. A lot of people think, brain damage, I shouldn't say it like that. They understand their cognitive delays, developmental delays, but they don't understand the significant behavior challenges that these children have and demonstrate in our schools and in our classrooms. It greatly increases impulsivity and aggression. As a term, you're all familiar with the autism spectrum, an umbrella term for the different areas in a child's development negatively impacted by their condition, by autism, that usually present together as a cluster. Well, our pediatricians are now using LED's neurobehavior signature, LED's signature, and it's an umbrella term for the different areas negatively impacted by a child, negatively impacted by the lead exposure that will cluster together. So, I'm going to start rushing through some of these, but, these children, from everything you saw, it makes sense. They're inattentive, they're impulsive, they have much higher rates of hyperactivity and attention deficit disorder. They can't control their emotions. They can't control their behaviors. They can't strategically plan for the next step. They have very poor visual and spatial abilities, so they can't interpret symbols, which means letters and numbers. They have very difficult time doing math and learning to read. Significant behavior challenges, I can't underscore this enough. Impulsivity, lack of emotional regulations, they're antisocial, they're aggressive, they're oppositional, they engage in destructive behaviors. Speech and language delays, processing disorders, and actual hearing loss. And fine and gross motor delays, they can't cross their midline. Two sides of their brain don't communicate, so they can't ride a tricycle, they can't, that bilateral coordination, they can't cross their midline to write their name or just swing a tennis racket or a baseball bat. They're clumsy, they fall a lot, they don't have good balance, they injure themselves. You heard in the video clip with Dr. Cecil that the average IQ in the Cincinnati lead study is 86. And it should be 100 in a group of normal, healthy children not exposed to lead. That's 14 IQ points. And if any of you are aware of IQ, that's astronomical. That's the difference between functioning well as an adult and not. That's the difference between functioning well and being successful and being able to manage yourself as an adult and take care of yourself and your family, and not being able to do that. They don't do well in school, they have significant behavior problems, and it persists through adulthood. When you're thinking about the cost in your community, this is what has come out of the Cincinnati lead study. Again, they've been following children from childhood well into adulthood, even from children exposed to lead in the uterus from their mother. Almost all of them, if not all of them, end up in special education. What does it cost a year for a child to be in special education in Raymond or anywhere in New Hampshire for that matter? More risky behaviors, more teen pregnancy, they drop out of school and get kicked out of school at higher rates. More substance abuse, which is really interesting in our current opioid crisis, and more research showing that children exposed to lead, the receptors in their brain are more receptive to opioids. More children get in trouble with the law before they're even 18. They abuse and neglect their own children, and much higher rates of criminal activity. Lead exposure in children has a huge cost to all of us on criminal justice, our court system, and how many children exposed to lead end up in prison. So this is Ralph Spezio, and I have to begin to wrap this up. But when you're talking about our school systems, he was the superintendent of schools, first principal superintendent of schools in Rochester, New York. And he has a TED Talk that I'd encourage you to watch. But he tells the story that as a superintendent, he had no idea about lead exposure, and most don't in New Hampshire. And he talks about walking down the hall one day and hearing two school nurses chatting, really upset. They both had kindergarten entry health forms in front of them. And one nurse is saying to another, like, oh my gosh, they're all been exposed to lead. They're all poisoned. They're all coming in poisoned. And he tells in his TED Talk that he turns on his heels and he says, what are you ladies talking about? And he had no idea the lead issue in his community. And he had been transformational in changing buildings and staff wages and programming and really transformational. But he talks about there were groups of children he could not help. And he was so frustrated and concerned by it. And this is when he began to connect the dots. Long story short, he went on to get the medical records of every single child enrolled in Rochester Public Schools in Rochester, New York. And this was before universal testing, so not everyone was required to be tested. But when he got the medical records for every student in his school system, 41% had a documented elevation. 41% of the kids in his schools were poisoned. 41%. And not only that, of that 41%, every single child who had been poisoned by lead, 100% of them were in special education. 100%. It's completely preventable. He went on to do amazing things, not only developing curriculum to help and support these children, but amazing things to prevent it in the community and to really push not only to get children tested, universal testing is in effect in New York, but to get pregnant women tested twice. This just, again, as you connect the dots as to why we need to pay attention to this, this is September of 2019, so just a year ago, September. It says, in Flint, Michigan, schools overwhelmed by special ed needs in aftermath of lead crisis. This is Educational Week, national, well-respected professional journal in the United States. They've had a 56% increase, 56% increase after 18 months of exposure. So our kids in New Hampshire are poisoned from lead paint dust, and it's in our housing. We have some of the oldest housing in the nation. 60% of our housing, if we take our state collectively, was built before 1978. But in your communities in the Seacoast and, for example, Manchester, Old City, 75% of its housing, Claremont, 83, Rochester, 82. So in our communities, even if a child happens to live in a new house or a new apartment, chances are they're spending time at childcare, school-based, church-based and on Sunday, grandmother's house, friend's house, family childcare that still has lead hazards. And most of our kids are not living in newer residences in most parts of our state because we have such old housing. We had a family in Dover, bought a beautiful 6,000 square foot Victorian. They thought they got the house of their dreams and started renovating it. All 4 of their children were poisoned. 2 of them had to go down to Children's to be chelated because they had no idea what they were doing as they were scraping walls. So how are our kids poisoned? So we've talked about, it's predominantly through our old surfaces like this. Even if there's new paint, when doors open and close, feet go across stair treads that are painted, we wear down to old surfaces. And this is, porches are iconic in New England, in New Hampshire. And this is a place in Manchester where we had 2 children poisoned. And you can see the porch railings that are all disintegrating, and it all went all over their toys where they touched and were playing every day. Windows, children love to look out the window, put their hands there. Every time a window goes up and down, it can generate lead dust. From the scraping, it blows in the room, goes on their hands and their toys, and they'll bite on those surfaces if they're teething, and it tastes good. They don't want to stop doing it. Bare soil, kids play in the soil around old houses. Indian spices. This is a big issue in our cities that settle refugees, as well as those Nashua area. We have a large Indian demographic. Imported spices. I don't mean McCormick's that you're going to get at Hannaford's. I mean imported spices that come in from families or in mom and pop ethnic stores. They can be 25% lead. 25% lead. We see it in our refugee populations with India, Afghani, Nepal, Afghanistan. We'll see it in spices as well. Lead ultimately stores in your bones, and I'm going to wrap this up here, but I want to make this point. Lead ultimately goes through your blood, through your brain, and into your bones. If a little girl's exposed to lead and not tested, it's all stored in her bones. And in your second trimester of pregnancy, you shed calcium starting at week 13 and 14. It's Mother Nature's fantastic device. The calcium comes out of your bones in a woman, goes through the bloodstream into the baby, so that the baby has calcium to start growing his or her bones. It's a great thing. And if mom's in poor nutrition status, she's going to shed even more calcium. It's a great thing. It's not so great if that little girl has lead stored in her bones from childhood. Because when that mom sheds the calcium for her baby, she sheds the lead. Much higher rate of stillbirth and miscarriage. It's so acute toxicity, the baby dies. If the baby's born very sick often has tumors on kidneys and other organs. And if the baby survives and doesn't have any of that, they have the same impact that we saw in the Cincinnati lead study. Learning disabilities, lower IQ, behavior issues. So pregnant women need to be tested twice, and it is never done in New Hampshire. There is no requirement. You need to test right away when a mom's pregnant, you know, when they take a gallon of blood and test you for everything if you've been pregnant. We need to test for lead then, because if mom's coming in contact with lead, at that time it will show up in her blood and we want to get her away from it. But we also need to test again at week 13, 14, the beginning of the second trimester, because if they're shedding calcium, and they will be shedding calcium, if they're shedding lead, it's going to show up in their blood. And there's not a whole lot we can do, but we want to increase their calcium in their diet and supplements, so hopefully they're shedding the least amount, and they're certainly going to track their pregnancy differently. So good area for policy intervention here. So it's really important to test our kids for 100 reasons, but critically important too to test our female children, because otherwise they'll pass it on to the next generation. So 1/3 of our children in New Hampshire are poisoned during renovations. This is New Hampshire data. When people either hire contractors that are not lead safe certified, like Tamara Rubin's story, or when they try to do it themselves because they watch HTV and they think they know how to do it, 1/3 of our kids. This is what we see all over New England, all over New Hampshire, and this is what it's supposed to look like. And most people say, I've never seen that in my whole life. You know, the windows are covered, the ground's covered, signage up, no one's home next door. They're in respirators, they have on Tyvac, that's a wet sprayer, sprays before you scrape, and it's sucked up in a HEPA vac, all disposed properly. You know, and this is what happens. They watch HGTV and they go out there and do it themselves. All the while the kids are running around the yard, and tonight they're going to turn on the air conditioning and suck all that stuff in the house. Because if you don't know, you don't know. All the more reason we need to educate our families with young children. So in New Hampshire, in April of 2018, we moved to universal testing. We now require that all children be tested at age 1 and again at age 2. We are increasing, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. In 2019, 42% of our 2-year-olds were not tested, 42%. So we're not getting it done, certainly not yet with our 2-year-olds. It can be done with a finger stick right in the office. If you all haven't met John Klunk, he's your pediatrician at Elliott Pediatrics in Raymond. He is a testing hero and really pushed to get this device put in his office there and at Elliott Pediatrics in Bedford. He is a champion to have on any of your initiatives. The other thing I want to put out to you, this is my daughter's immunization record. It's the only file I can show you. First, please note she's fully immunized. If you want to clap for me, yes, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. But down at the bottom, there is a space on every health form to have your blood lead levels tests recorded. You can see my daughters are empty because I live in Concord, and even though we're universal testing even before the test, even before it was required by law, my kids weren't tested because it just wasn't getting done in New Hampshire. But a very easy way to push the testing rates in your community is to have your school system pass a policy to require that the blood lead level tests be recorded on the entry forms. It's now required by law. You're not asking for anything that they shouldn't already have. You have to have your varicella and your 3 MMRs and partridge in a pear tree. So now you need to have your blood lead level test results on there. And if they're not there, I have 30 days to go get it, or better yet, bring the Lead Care 2 right to kindergarten registration and do it right there. So finally, 2 things I'll just share. For those of you who work with young children or perhaps in special education, often those I work with are shocked to even know there is support services for support documents on how to work with children exposed to lead. This is educational interventions for children affected by lead. This is from the CDC. This is from the U.S. Department of Education, Office for Special Education. This is intervention ideas for infants, toddlers, children, and youth impacted by lead. This is one of my favorites, and then it goes by domain, by age group. You know, how do you change an environment to help toddlers? How do you change an environment to help a 7-year-old? How do you tweak your curriculum or your teaching methods to best support children who, in fact, have a permanent brain injury due to lead exposure? So, last slide. Make sure your kids are getting tested. Educate everybody you know about lead exposure. Work to establish a policy in your school district that makes sure those tests are required for kindergarten entry or for entry into your preschool or special ed preschools or special education referrals. So many times children are dealing with issues that are a result of lead exposure that are misdiagnosed or misunderstood, and then they don't end up getting the actual support services that might really benefit them. Your building permits in Raymond, if they're going to do work on a pre-1978 house, ask your city to say, hey, what is your certification number? It's a federal law. If you're going to go ripping up a kitchen and putting on an addition on a house in Raymond that was built before 1978, that's great. Hope it comes out beautiful, but what's your certification number? Simple policy change, that's not anything big. It's a federal law. You just have to put a field for it, space for it on your building permit. And report unsafe work practices. Now that you understand this issue, you're going to drive around today and every day until it snows, and you're going to see houses that either the homeowner or a contractor is working on not following lead safe work practices. That's my cell phone number, and I'm completely serious. Take out your phones and put that number. Just put lead, L-E-A-D, and put that cell number in it. It's New Hampshire, 496-1310. And I am dead serious. I'm not leaving this slide for a minute until you see you all picking up your phones. So you can call me, you can text me, or you can send me pictures. Send me a picture of the contractor on the ladder, the number on the house, the street sign, and say, I'm not sure, but this doesn't really look like it's meeting the law, as the kids are running around the yard and, you know, lead paint chips are falling everywhere. And we can either contact the EPA or we can contact your local health officer or code enforcement to go out and see what's going on. Finally, follow us at New Hampshire Division of Public Health Services. Though it's heavy COVID at the moment, we post several times a month, as do all of our other public health programs, so you can learn about any new information, research, and events at New Hampshire Pub Health. So I'll end there, and I did run over. Sorry, I could talk about this for hours. But I'm happy to answer questions, and if they're not time, I completely understand. But Celeste can get you my email to send me questions, and you have my cell phone number, and I look forward to getting many pictures, as I always do after trainings. Again, why is it so important that you put my cell phone number? Because a third of our kids in New Hampshire who are poisoned, their parents, their grandparents report somewhere in that child's life in the previous 6 months there were renovations. A third of our kids are poisoned by improper renovations. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. This was very, very informative. I know Christine and I walk on our lunch break in downtown area, and we've seen several houses being painted very recently on the ladder with just their paintbrush or whatever they had scraping the house. So
why they're eating their lunch, or, oh yeah, the kids are in the front yard. It's unfortunate at best. So call me up, send me a picture.
Greg has a question. You need to unmute though.
Hey Gail, sorry if this is a dumb question. Am I safe eating Indian food?
Very, very good question. I would be very cautious. I mean, sadly, the best Indian food is in the mom and pop ethnic restaurant, right? Where if they're using imported spices, those are not regulated by the U.S. and I would say confidently they will have lead in them. And so as an adult, you have a blood-brain barrier. You're not going to end up with the same impact as young children, but it makes adult very sick, and there's certainly neurological impact as well. I would, if you know them well enough, I would want to find out where
it's
they're
not regulated by the food and board or the.
No, they're it's just like when we have medications come in from other countries why all our toys that come in from China are children's toys have lead paint on them because they aren't produced under our laws, they're imported. Again, if you go to Hannaford and get Durkee or McCormick spices, those are produced in the U.S. and regulated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, so they obviously don't have lead in them. But this is a significant issue. I mean, I can have you.
Are there health inspectors who go into restaurants and things and take a look at that stuff, though?
They're not looking for lead. They're looking for vanilla and
Pests,
yeah, E. coli and rats and mouse droppings. So,
all right, thank you.
It was a good question, Greg.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I get it a lot. Our nurses, our public health nurses, routinely come back with little bags of spices. It looks more nefarious than it is, that we're sending to our lab to get tested from our families that either get them sent over or that are using spices from like mom and pop little ethnic stores. Depending upon your community, like Concord is a refugee resettlement area. So we have a lot of little mom and pop stores that are selling, if you will, foods from home that they're looking for. And those aren't regulated by the FDA. And they're often in bags like that where you're shoveling it out the same way you shovel out stuff at the, food co-op or something like that.
Caitlin, did you have a question?
Super quick one. Is there a list of credited contractors that you can
Yes.
count on who will do a renovation properly?
Yes. So glad you asked. Yes, you can go on and I'll send the link to Celeste to get it out to you. But on both our New Hampshire DHHS website on our pages, as well as Marie can tell you about our New Hampshire Lead-Free Kids, which is a more parent user-friendly site. It's how to find a lead-safe contractor, and it's something you should ask for. And in a longer presentation, I spend more time on those pieces. But yes, they all should have. I've gone through the RRP certification, which is more for home renovations, and you have a little card and a number that they should have.
So with the agenda that I sent out today, there were a couple of links for a couple of resources that you should have gotten as well. So we can get those up on our website too.
But finally, I'll sign off. The documentary is Misled: America's Secret Epidemic on YouTube. It's free. Get some popcorn and watch it, though you'll probably feel nauseous by the time you're done. And finally, it's Dutch Boy Paint failed toy as didn't pass on YouTube. That'll make you nauseous too on the history. Well, thank you all. I look forward to continued collaboration, and best wishes in moving the needle on this topic in Raymond.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time and joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, that was really good, I think. Very informative. I've been hearing a lot about lead paint, and it's in the newspaper last month, and it's interesting how it's tied to a lot of behavioral things that we necessarily would not think of as the first thing to look at. So we have some work to do. Maybe we can work with the school on that policy.
Yeah, no, Celeste, I actually wrote that down just thinking about our, our rates of identification. And, I've worked with young people individually in their homes when they've been exposed or been poisoned in this way. So I look forward to talking with you about that more.
I actually have the report that Maria shared with me for Raymond. So we have our levels as well. I thought Gail was going to talk about that, but obviously she had limited time. So I can share that and we can go over that too. Yes, Maria?
I just wanted to let everybody know that we do have, the Seacoast Public Health Network does have an active lead prevention work group. So if anybody's interested in joining, I put my email in the chat. And we are looking for people to help us to disseminate this important information through social media platforms. We encourage you to watch that documentary. It is unbelievably impactful. So I'm just shocked at how many people don't know about this. I myself did not know the extent of this. So we welcome anybody to help us out with this. Thank you.
Okay, moving on the agenda. If you have a copy, I don't know, but I have it in front of me. So for going into the holidays, we're going to be working a little bit more on alcohol awareness and prevention, given COVID and well, we may not have as many family get-togethers and parties as typical, but we still want to raise a bit of awareness about that. That was something that was identified in our youth risk behavior survey as our kids using or experimenting with alcohol, and talking with our youth action kids. They had some concerns around it as well for parents who provide and the availability of it in the community. So we're going to be working with that. New Hampshire liquor enforcement will be part of our December meeting, going over the laws in the state of New Hampshire as far as social hosting, providing alcohol to minors, the implications of if a young person gets caught with alcohol with their license. We use this heavily as a part of our My Choice diversion program, which we haven't had in a while. And the parents and the kids who are part of that typically say, how come nobody ever taught us this? How come we never learned this anyplace else? So it's important that they know it. That'll be at our December meeting. As some updates, careful Maria, you have a visitor. Sorry. Some updates. I mentioned that we're going to continue to stay remote at this point for our coalition meetings. We had Red Ribbon Week, and a huge shout out to the school, Brianna, Christine, and Greg, and Jess. It was an amazing event considering we have COVID, our kids are half remote, half in the building. We worked with the school and we had some t-shirts designed with the Live Drug Free message on it. And I think it went really well. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. There was activities in the school, there was bulletin boards. There was a lot of great awareness. So thank you for making that a great event. And as part of Red Ribbon Week, we worked with the DEA, and we had our medication take-back event at Walgreens, and we collected 317 pounds of medication for safe disposal. So that was a huge thing. And we got to interact socially distanced with masks safely with some of our people in the community. So that was exciting. And thank you to Pam for helping with that. And obviously the Raymond Police Department and Walgreens too. Disc golf. I don't know if all of you know that we are working with a family in the community to bring a disc golf course up to Riverside Park. It's moving along very quickly. Patrick and Pat actually ordered the baskets for it. So they should be coming in soon. All of the trees and all of the environmental work, we'll say, for the course has been done. So if you know where Riverside Park is off of Sundine Parkway, it's a great resource our community has that many people don't know about. So hopefully putting this disc golf course up there, we already know it's promoted people going up to the park. So I think it's a great addition for people to have a healthy activity to participate in. Youth action. Christine, I'll give you the floor for youth action.
Thank you. So we've actually had a few meetings via Zoom. I want to give a shout out to Greg, who's helped me in the school. We found a time during the day during RAM on Wednesdays for the high school, and then for the after school on Wednesdays for the middle school. Middle school's a little bit different. My group is mostly remote, so school didn't really interfere with them, so they wanted to still meet in the afternoon. But it was tougher getting the high school kids with sports and other obligations, to be back on Zoom with school being hybrid. So Greg, thank you. It's really been helpful being there with the kids and having your help. But we have a good group, and we've been working on, like Celeste said, Red Ribbon Week. We've also been working on the Great American Smokeout, which is next Thursday. We've been working on a bulletin board, and I've been doing some graphics that will be coming out during that week that the kids wanted to see on social media from the coalition as messaging for parents and for other teens. There'll be some resources that will be shown on those slides, on the graphics for people to quit smoking or start their journey to quitting smoking on that day. So that's what we've been doing, and we hope to keep going. And we didn't meet yesterday because there was no school and a day off for us because of Veterans Day, but we'll be back to it next week.
Very good. Do you want to talk about the warrant articles?
Absolutely. We had 2 warrant articles going out. One that was restricting the shops in town or businesses in town to open up and have marijuana sign imaging or the likeness of that on commercial signage. And we got over 25 signatures for that. And we've got another almost 30 signatures for the prohibiting of any marijuana business in town. So any establishment that would want to, sell marijuana or have it in food or, anything that's related to marijuana or cannabis, not affecting anybody that is taking marijuana for medical reasons. This would just be for the recreational side of marijuana. So we have about 30 signatures for that one, and we'll be putting that on the on the ballot for March, because we have enough signatures and support for those 2 warrant articles. And one of our girls from Youth Action went door to door in her neighborhood and got most of those signatures for us. So it's definitely something that we don't want to see in our town, and it's definitely something that just by a couple of kids going out and getting some signatures really worked with the adults in the community. They're seeing that the kids are impacted by it and they don't want to see it in the community. So the adults are listening to the kids more than they would me or any one of us, I think, really, when it comes to making that ask.
Very good. Thank you. That's definitely the most exciting part about it for me, when she told me that the kids took the active lead in this. So we hear from adults usually that, oh, kids want this. This is a normal thing for kids. But our Youth Action kids, and even kids that we've had focus groups with, are pretty vocal about they're not in favor of marijuana legalization or commercialization, and they see the impacts on their family. So
absolutely.
Great job. Thank you, Christine. We did not have a prevention summit in October like we typically do every year, that many, if not all of you, have been to. We have some new people who have not been to it, obviously, but it's my favorite event of the year. I know that. It's an opportunity to highlight the work the coalition does, highlight all of our partnerships. We all get together. It's very social. We get to talk with each other, have a nice breakfast, and walk away having learned something from the speaker that comes. And we've heard from numerous people who miss us having the event, even people who are not able to attend but have watched it afterwards on YouTube at a time that was convenient for them. And they've asked questions of when is it going to be? What are we doing in its place? And it's hard to replace the Prevention Summit and yet another virtual event when most people are virtual event out. And it's hard to capture that event into an event, obviously. So we're working on putting together a small video in being aware of everyone's time and being overloaded. But 2020, in spite of COVID, was a really good year for the Raymond Coalition for Youth, and mostly due to all of the people who are part of the absolutely due to everybody who's part of the coalition, many of you who are on this call. our partnerships, our collaboration, working together. We've done a lot of great prevention messaging in spite of everything. Before COVID even hit in March, we had 3 major events that had happened: Project Safeguard, Family Fun Night. We went and presented at CADCA in Washington, D.C. So we had a lot of things that we wanted to celebrate with everybody and recognize how important all of you are to the success of the coalition. And we wrapped up our DFC grant, our drug-free community grant. So that was a big accomplishment as well. So something will be coming in the future before the end of the year. So look forward to that. Hopefully you'll look forward to that. And the last announcement is that tomorrow night, Friday the 13th, was supposed to be our gala that was postponed 3 times from March. It's now, I guess, canceled or postponed again till March 6th of 2021. We're going to call it canceled. So this event is canceled and we're going to just start new in 2021. So it has no overhanging taboo or anything with it. And hopefully it will go off without a hitch on March 6th with Justin McKinney is working with us. So we're looking forward to that. Does anybody have anything they would like to share or to add? No? I want to thank Maria again for bringing Gail to our attention. If there's somebody
Chelsea.
Oh,
Had her
Chelsea?
hand up.
Sorry, I was a little late. I was a little late to the party on that one. I just wanted to share that I am working in collaboration with AAA Northern New England and the New Hampshire Office of Highway Safety to put on a 4-part webinar series in December. It's going to be one every week. The first one's on teen driving. There is one on impaired driving, so I will be sure to share that, and you can feel free to share that those flyers with everyone in the group.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We will definitely do that. Anybody else? If there's somebody that a topic that you want a speaker to come in and talk about, or something you want covered, or you want whatever you're working on in your organization, if you want to share that with the group, definitely please let us know. And just like Gail gave her presentation this morning, we can do a presentation like that also. If nobody has anything else, I don't see any other hands. I guess that will wrap up the meeting. I want to wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. Hope you have time to do something special with your family and friends in a very safe capacity, whatever that looks like. Everybody will be a little bit different this year, I'm sure, but we'll be thinking of you and hope you have a great Thanksgiving. And our next meeting is December 10th. So see you next month. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good to see you.